Is the dollar destined to fall? The US dollar fell on Tuesday after President Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, news that sparked a risk rally across markets. Israel has already accused Iran of breaching the truce, but overall the dollar is poised for its worst first-half performance since 1986. Worries about the outlook for US growth and foreign appetite for American assets have dented demand. So, what does the second half of the year hold for the greenback? Francesco Pesole is an FX strategist at ING. So the dollar was drawing support from safe haven demand. Is this now short-lived?
Yeah, and I think the support that it managed to gather, the dollar managed to gather from the whole escalation in geopolitical risks was actually quite small. I think markets was still looked very much minded to buy the dips in euro dollar. They still saw sort of part of it is probably due to the fact that they saw this geopolitical risk spike and the oil spike as temporary. But on top of that, there are all those medium-term considerations that are sharply dollar negative, and that kind of prevented the dollar to really benefit from a situation where geopolitical risk and oil prices were both rising at the same time. That would, in all other situations, would have probably led to much bigger dollar gains.
Back to yesterday and adding to headwinds for the dollar, comments from Fed policymaker Michelle Bowman. She said that she could support reducing interest rates as soon as July. So are the risks for an unexpected cut underpriced for the dollar?
Well, I'm not sure. From a macro perspective, I think, and based on what the official communication of the Fed has been from Fed Chair Powell, I wouldn't say it's underpriced, because what they've communicated to markets is that they want to wait for the inflation spike from tariffs to happen, and only after they sort of assessed how persistent this inflation could or could not be, then they would be able to sort of start cutting rates. However, it is a risk specifically for the dollar. And that's because if Powell in today's and tomorrow's testimony to Congress does signal a little bit of a dovish shift, I think markets may read that as a sign that the Fed is losing a little bit of independence, and that perhaps Trump has finally managed to breach the sort of independence shield of the Fed and sort of to influence potentially the decisions moving forward. So that is a very negative factor for the dollar, and one that can really bring euro dollar considerably higher from here.
You mentioned the risk of tariffs and the threats of new tariffs starting in early July are looming. Could we see another sell America moment?
Yeah, that entirely depends on how Trump wants to play it. Obviously, if he wants to leverage the sort of deadline effect and only maybe take it to the 11th hour before delivering another sort of relief pause for markets, then indeed markets may get a bit jittery. And as we saw in April in the FX market, this generally has meant that the dollar takes a hit, because that sell America sort of narrative that you mentioned emerges again. I think it's very hard to predict at the moment. If we look at the past history of how Trump dealt with tariffs, there are indeed quite substantial risks that he may want to play it until sort of the very last minute. So we do think there are probably some downside risks for the dollar there.
The pound as well, it's outperforming European currencies this morning. Last week, your monthly report said that you expect underperformance from the pound in the long term. So why is that?
Well, we think the domestic picture will deteriorate in the second half of the year. Growth tends to be softer in the UK in the second half of the year. We think that markets are fully pricing into rate cuts. This is based on expectations, but perhaps there is a risk that if we do see another poor read on jobs market data, and perhaps inflation comes in a little softer, markets will start speculating on 3 cuts by the BOE by the end of the year. And in general, the pound is quite overvalued relative to long-term fundamentals. So we think that euro sterling probably has room to rise further by the end of the year.
That was Francesco Pesole, FX strategist at ING. Don't forget, you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.